This is the Unscripted Podcast. Bow, 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 bow. Rocky Top, you'll always be.
Bob, I'm telling you, man.
Home, sweet home to me.
This is so ridiculous, Bob.
Good old Rocky Top.
The bad thing is you have no self-awareness of how obnoxious Tennessee fans are.
No.
Listen, let me tell you something. I really did think Alabama fans were obnoxious, and I'm not even an Alabama fan, okay? But this is
Watch your words.
This is Tuesday.
You're married to one.
Bob, this is Tuesday, okay? You're still talking about
15 years, Chris.
Okay.
Listen,
right. So it's like a cicada.
all these other teams that think that they're good, like Tennessee scored more points against Alabama since 1907. 1907.
When they had the little flat helmets on.
The most points that's been scored against Alabama since 1907. So all these other teams are like, well, I just don't know how Tennessee compares to whoever. 1907.
You know, the thing about stats is I can make them read anything I want to.
You can.
I mean, I'm just telling you. You know, it's.
But you don't score 5 touchdowns by one receiver against Alabama and you stink.
But one receiver. Just think about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's our second class guy. Our first class dude is injured.
So one receiver, Bob, is your champion. Then it's not Tennessee. It's not the coach. It's one receiver.
That was your phone.
It was. It's hooked up.
No, one receiver just became a legend. He's a 3-star dude.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. Anyways.
Huh?
Yeah.
It was the kicker that won it for Tennessee and lost it. Do you ever think that like Saban, he's like, I know we got to do special teams at some point, but I ain't got time to worry about that right now.
No, he's all about that.
Well, their kickers are terrible at Alabama.
Yes, they are.
I mean, they just historically, it's just like just get somebody.
If anybody would know, it would be Chris.
Yeah, he finally put one on. Got one to be his. On scholarship, after them LSU years right there, and I get it. Like, can't we just get a guy who can kick, you know?
I mean, like, that there's some dude out there that's just flat kicking the ball all evening long thinking, I'm going to be a kicker for college football. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who that guy is. And your daddy don't go home and, just because your daddy don't brag about that. You know, your daddy doesn't say, like, you really ought to see how good my boy can kick that football.
All you Alabama Christians, I can speak from experience for 15 years that Jesus will get you through this. Like, lots of God's word will help you get through this. Being very humble. I've been eating humble pie for the last 15 years, and
is that what you call it?
Patience. Like, though the genuineness of your faith, though it be tested by fire, that it may be found. What's that verse? And also there's a verse. Well, I won't go to that one. But we'll put. I don't know how many weeks you think we should keep our Alabama fans on the prayer list.
Bob, I'm just telling you, like.
They're not even for
the whole SEC. That's
they're
right.
Not even
They're
listening
done.
to this podcast.
My wife's done quit now. She's done. She's done quit listening now. So here's the thing.
I love your wife, and boy, is she passionate about football.
She loves it, man. And that was a blessing when I married her. I never have to hear any fussing about watching sports. If I want to go watch I can't tell you how many Carolina games I went and watched, and I've never heard her say anything about it before because she gets it. She understands. So
verse 6. Here you go of 1 Peter 1. In this you greatly rejoice, not about winning. In this you greatly rejoice. Though now, for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen you love, though now you do not see him, yet believing you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Verses like that of what got me through the last 15 years. So
I'm glad.
Because I couldn't see Tennessee wasn't doing anything good, for 15 years.
None of our kids have ever seen Tennessee beat Alabama.
Now they have.
I'm just saying, like none. And if it goes this way, at the same pace, some of our kids will have kids before they do it again.
Yeah, my my marriage has been tested by fire. Like 2 times. This is the second time Tennessee's beat Alabama since I've been married. Once was the week after we got married, because we got married on a bye week, Tennessee. And then once after we got married, the week after, and then 2022.
I'm just so glad, Bob, that your life revolves around. You know, you can date your life events by how many times Tennessee beats Alabama. You know.
Yeah.
So let's get back
we're looking for that to change. Yeah. So we started last week. We started
spun the wheel.
Yeah, we spun the wheel, and the question was why do babies die? And so we dealt with the why. So if you haven't heard that podcast, you need to go back and listen to it, because we said we would take a 2-part session, and so go back and listen to part 1, and this will be part 2. So where do you go? And I guess when you look at this verse right here that I just read, you know, as a halfway joke there with college football, like losing a child. I mean, you talk about your faith being tested by fire.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter what football game was playing or basketball game. You know, when your youngins get sick or you think there's something going to happen, you know, none of that stuff matters anymore. And, you know, so this week we need to think about really the what. What happens when? Because I was thinking about this week, and I was talking to my middle son, Liam. He's 12, and he said he was trying to make some connections in his head. We were talking about abortion, what we're talking about, and he was trying to make some connections in his head. And he said, "Well, Daddy, how come if babies, when they die, because Romans 6 and verse 23 says what?
The wages of sin is death.
The wages of sin is death, right?
Yeah, but the gift of God is eternal life.
In Christ Jesus, our Lord. So he in his mind, he started putting some things together, and he said, okay, well, if you must sin in order to go to hell or to obey the gospel, you know, in order to be saved, you must be lost. Mm-hmm. So if you're never lost, then you're always saved. And so Liam was just trying to, you know, he's kind of black and white, you know, and he's trying to work this thing out in his head. I'm still fighting a little bit of a cold here. And he said, why is abortion really a bad thing? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, you know, if those babies just go to heaven, Daddy, then isn't that the best thing for them then? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, if the babies are aborted and then we go to heaven, if they go to heaven, then isn't that the best thing that could really ever happen to them? And I said, well, I see your point. And what he's trying to do is rationalize, like should we be fighting against abortion? You know, well, and he said, well, doesn't Satan think that because Liam, in his mind, he's seeing the snapshot of what it looks like for the abortion sin as far as killing babies. He's not thinking about the people committing the act. So the baby dies, so the baby automatically goes to heaven because it can't sin. Therefore, it can't be accountable. And then if it can't be accountable, it can't go to hell. And then if it can't go to hell, then it can, by default, go to heaven. So Liam's saying, like, isn't the right thing then, isn't Satan really losing by doing this? It seems like to me he's working against himself, is what Liam said. And I said, well, son, you got to understand that this abortion thing goes a lot deeper than just the babies going to heaven and hell. Because Liam, in his mind, was thinking that's the best thing that could happen. And I was like, Liam, just think about this. I said, you've got the people that commit the sin. The people that commit the sin, you know, that say, I like to have an abortion. The people that perform the abortion that are actually the murderers. You know, the ones that say I want it done are the murderers by proxy. And then I said, on the other side of the coin, you got the people that are so against it that they hate the people that do it. And I said, so what Satan has done is he's won on all fronts that way, because he's got the people to hate the people that are doing it. And Jesus said, let me tell you something. If you hate your brother, then you're in danger of hellfire yourself. And then you got the people that are murderers, and you got the people that commit the actual murder. And so he goes, and I was trying to help him see this whole process of the way that Satan works in this. While Satan, you know, we may look at that and think those sweet babies, they get to go to heaven. Well, that's true. That's true, but there's a whole lot of trouble that happens with it. And it's because there's just something so stirring about these things to us. We see these little babies as something precious. Well, the blessing for us as Christians is knowing this, that the what happens to a baby. What happens to a baby when they die? Well, let's look at what the Bible says about it, and then we'll try to make some application. Is that okay? Let's turn to Romans 7.
Yeah, let's do that. And we're going to take a 2-second break, and we're going to sync our audio and our video together. We'll be right back in 2 seconds. All right. So, which verse did you say again?
Romans chapter 7.
All right.
In Romans 7, Paul, we talked about this a little bit, pretty extensively to some degree, but we got to understand the nature of babies. And when we think about babies, the what for a baby is that, last week we talked about the why. Why do babies die? Why do bad things happen to good people is the question that's really being asked. And in Romans 7, Paul's talking about this idea of us being freed from the law. Well, what was the law's job to do? The law's job was to define what sin was. It was to help us understand that the thing that you think is wrong really is wrong. So whether I live on an island somewhere and somebody comes along and you and I live on this island, somebody comes along and kills you, I come back and your head's bashed in with a rock. I may not know to call that murder, but I realize something bad has happened. And so the law's job was to give it a name, to define it. In Romans 7, Paul says in verse 7, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin. I wouldn't have known what to call it, except through the law. Because that's why he says, for I would have not known covetousness unless the law said, you shall not covet. But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law, sin was dead. I was alive once without the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died." So what Paul is saying is that once I understood that it was wrong, then I died. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. So that means that Paul said that it's not that, they didn't give the law in Paul's lifetime. The law was given on Sinai. Mm-hmm. But what Paul is saying is that once I understood the law, what God wanted me to do, what God expected and required of me, and I didn't do those things, then it was sin, and then it revived. Isn't it interesting they would use that word? It revived in me, and I died. And so the reason why Liam was asking this question about abortion was because he was just thinking about the babies. If Satan, like Liam saying, well, if Satan, if babies just automatically go to heaven, wouldn't Satan want most babies to live so that most people aren't going to go to heaven, right, Daddy? Yes. Well, it seems like he's losing. Well, he's willing to give up a little bit of ground.
He's willing to give up one baby so that he can gain two, a mama and a daddy and the rest of the children.
Yep, and the doctor that did it and the people that pay for the clinics and all those things. So this is a tactical move. This is a pawn, is what he's seeing. And so what we need to understand is what happens. There's a blessing in this, is that, the Lord doesn't spend a lot of time talking about heaven. And there's a blessing in this in knowing that heaven will be littered with babies. I mean, this idea.
That's a great thing. It's a blessing, yes, that the babies will be there.
Well, think about this. I mean, this thing is not a new thing, killing babies. I'm not saying it's right. But you remember in Jesus' day, Herod killed all of them under a certain age, right? In Moses' day, they killed all the babies because the Hebrews, they were worried about that's how Moses was really saved, was because the Hebrew midwives then disobeyed Pharaoh's order to kill the babies, right? So this idea, and as a matter of fact, the term exposure, right? When you ever heard of somebody dying of exposure before? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That comes from the Greek word, really, that they would go and expose babies. They would literally just leave them in the wilderness to let them die if there was something wrong with them, cripples, some kind of deformation or something like that. They would just go expose them and let them die. So the idea of babies unfortunately, dying or being inhumanely treated is a very old thing. But when our babies die, it's still devastating to us. But I want to give comfort today to those in knowing the what happens afterwards. Because there's a real blessing that the Bible paints this picture of the way eternity looks for us. And so, what are some things that come to your mind, Bob, when you start thinking about eternity, for that matter goes? Like this moment that we breathe out our last. What are some things that you think about?
In hope for a child?
Yeah, or just for anybody.
Yeah. Well, there's a passage of scripture that I'm reminded of when we look at David. When David had sinned with Bathsheba, God said, "You did this in secret." He's like, "I'm going to expose this."
In 2 Samuel 12, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, 2 Samuel 12. So Nathan comes to David, and this is such a blessing, because sometimes it's not what you say to people, it's how you say it. And definitely dealing with the subject of people with losing a child, that it's such a challenging moment, because I remember sitting here talking to a lady and ministering to her in the past couple of weeks, where there was they're dealing with a suicide in their family, and I said, there's going to be people. I said, you're going to have to forgive us, because there's going to be people that are going to come to you and they're going to mean well, but they're going to say the wrong things. There's going to be people who are going to come to you and they're going to try to comfort you, but their words are not going to be comforting, and they're going to be saying things that aren't. They're trying, but
they're going to miss the mark.
They're going to miss it, and I was telling her on that day that they're going to miss it and they're going to mess this thing up. So Nathan comes to David and he tells him this parable. He tells him this parable about this rich guy who, this traveling guy who needed a lamb for a sacrifice, and he only had one little ewe lamb. Comes to a rich man, so to speak, and the rich man wouldn't even give him, but in fact takes away the one little ewe lamb from him and sacrifices him. And David's like indignant about this, and Nathan says, "You're the man.
You're the man.
You're that dude." And so, anyways, when David he pleads with God about the child, and God says, "Hey, because of this, like, this child's going to be taken from you, David." And now, we also remember in John 9 that when Jesus heals this blind man, these people are going, "Who sinned, this man or his parents?" Neither of them sinned. So this blindness that happened on this blind man was not because his parents sinned or because this guy sinned, but what the Lord said was so that the works of God could be manifested through him. And so I encourage people who lose a child to see that the works of God can be manifested through this situation. Now, so you get to this with David.
And
it's hard. Back to David.
It's really hard.
David is sitting here, and this servants, David hears all this whispering, and the servants are like, "Man, the kid's dead," or whatever. And
Verse 18.
David just asked him, he's like,
on the seventh day it came to pass that the child died.
Yeah.
And the servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they'd said, "Indeed, while the child was alive, we spoke, and he would not heed our voice. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He may do some harm." They're thinking he's going to wig out.
Yeah.
That's it. But understand, like, even though David was their rock star king, right? Mm-hmm. That's still a natural reaction.
Yeah, they're afraid that he was a warrior. Saul killed his thousands, David killed his 10,000. They're like, he's going to kill us all.
Right.
And they would have witnessed, what was it when, you'll have to help me out with this one, but when the armor bearer Saul came, or somebody came and reported that Saul had been killed.
Yeah, at the end of so it'd be at the end of 1 Samuel, I believe,
but David has that guy executed.
Yeah, and he comes and doctors the story, and David's like, "Well, you killed him."
Yeah.
You killed the Lord's anointed, and he's like, and this guy's thinking like, "I was doing a merciful act."
Right.
I was doing this merciful thing.
And they're thinking, if you be the one to tell him, because whoever tells him that the kid's dead, like they're fixing to get killed.
Right. And that's why verse 19.
And you may be thinking that. Listen, I had to give a death notification of a child the other day on the phone to two parents at two separate times. And let me tell you something. That's horrible, and that's not the way it should be done. They were out.
Why did you have to do that for?
They were out of state, and so when the police department wants something difficult done, who do they call? They call their chaplain to do that because nobody wants to step up. And I had to give my first death notification to a family when I was 19 years old, and it was horrible. But you gain wisdom from those things. But ideally, it's to be done in person. But the family said, I don't want social media or anybody else to tell his parents that he's passed away. We want to tell him, let him know. And so, I mean, I called them up, and parents, mama was oblivious, dad was oblivious. And I said, this is not supposed to be happening this way. And
they didn't even know he was sick or
he took his own life.
And they didn't even have anything to know about it.
And didn't know about it. And I'm calling them, 9 hours away, and it's it's horrible. So they're wondering who's going to give the death notification. And so you, as a person, you may be getting ready to talk to somebody who's lost a child, and you're saying, I don't know what to say, and whatever I say, they may be hostile toward. Listen, just do your best to,
and just keep
love
these things in perspective, that ultimately this child is okay.
Yeah.
So the only thing you're not going to change anything about the child. And David realized that here, and I'm sure we're going to read it, but your job is just to help them get through this.
A close mentor of mine wrote a book entitled When There Are No Words, and he wrote about the loss of his 16-year-old daughter when she was killed in a car accident. And so I grew up as a mentor, and I got to watch this man as he would, once every 4 to 6 months would mention his daughter in a sermon, would mention that. And that was part of his healing. But he the book's based on the first 4 sermons that he preached after her death. And he took a couple of weeks off, then he's back in the pulpit. And he said it took him, those sermons were recorded, and he said it took me 25 years to go back and listen to these recordings to stomach him. But I wanted to write the book so that somebody else could gain some comfort in them losing their child. And so he wrote about this part right here about David and losing this child. And so they go in and they find David, hey, David understands that the child's dead. He says,
now let's
verse 19.
Let's sit back and talk about what David's been doing.
Yeah. David's
been over here praying, and the child is ill, and David's trying his best, because sometimes there's a challenge, okay, that when there's a broken thing, that you don't become a broken thing yourself. And so David is over here, hair, tooth, and nail, praying, fasting, doing everything he can think of to get God to come around on this.
Laying out on the ground, being as humble as he can.
Right.
And so David, when he does this, when David perceived that the child was dead, therefore David said to the servants, is the child dead? And they said, he is dead. So David arose from the ground, washed and anointed himself, and changed his clothes, and went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. That's perspective. Then he went to his own house, and when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate. And the servant said to him, well, what is it that you've done? You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food. And he said, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept.
Verse 22.
For I said, who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. One perspective here, 2 perspectives. One is David's attitude of this, that I hope that my faith, when it's tested by fire, will be one that'll be found to praise the Lord regardless. Before he ate, he even went to the house of the Lord and worshiped after he found the news of his child that died.
So just remember, God's good all the time.
All the time.
When we get the good job, when we have the baby, when we get married, that's when we say that God is good all the time. But remember, when the baby dies, when the heartache comes, God is still good. He's still good. No matter what the situation is, he's still good. And
he's still God. He's still on the throne.
That's right. And it's hard. And David realizes that He tried everything he could in his power, but he knew it was ultimately God's will or
God's allowance.
God's allowance. God never wills that any baby should die, but that this situation ran its course in this way because of the situation that David had put himself into. And so ultimately, David realized that he couldn't go to the baby. I mean, the baby couldn't come to him, but that he could go to him. And
also in this same thing in verse 22, there's a thing here in this passage. Who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me? The graciousness for the child is the child's with God. So David's perspective, when I fasted, who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me? If the Lord takes the child, he's still been gracious to the child because the child's going to go and be with the Lord. But David's pleading with God to be gracious unto him so that he can still have the child. And so David was pleading with God on behalf of himself, not on behalf of the child. So just remember that when you pray for somebody, that for them to go on, for the Christian, for us to live is Christ, to die is gain. So when you pray for somebody, when you pray for them to live, like you're really praying for them to live with the Lord. But if you pray for them to live in this way, if something bad happens to me, and I'm going to be put in a situation to where I may be, let's say if I was paralyzed the rest of my life, all right. If people are in the bounds of praying for me to go on and be with the Lord, or me to be alive but paralyzed the rest of my life, I would rather you pray for me to go with the Lord. Here's why: because I'm afraid that my faith won't be strong enough to stay with the Lord even through being in paralysis.
You know, you ever friends with people on Facebook and you're like, I don't even know how I got to be friends with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on there a while back, the other day, really, and there was a guy on there that said, it started out the post, it was like, y'all pray for me. And he said, I'll be surrendered to the Kentucky Correctional Institute at 12 o'clock today. And I was like, what? And I didn't even know this guy, right? I don't even know. So I go back and I look at his thing, and it says, like, studied at Memphis School of Preaching, preacher in the church. Well, I just Googled his name and the little town he was from, and I read the story, and the cop pulls him over, and he's cooking meth in his car. He's got some weed, and he's cooking meth in his car, and so he's intoxicated. He's parked crazy.
This friend of yours on Facebook? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. Well, his last name was Tips. I mean, I wouldn't want to admit
Sounds
that.
like one of Ben's friends.
But he was from up near
Poor Ben.
He was from up near Glasgow, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And so I was looking at this, and then his post I was reading, he was like, I made a mistake, and I committed sin, and I didn't do the right thing, so I'm not asking you to pray that I be released from jail, because I've got to pay for that sin. But what I would like is if you can get me Bibles, I'm going to try to do the best I can while I'm there now. And that's what David is doing here. He's made a complete mess. Pray
for me to remain faithful.
Yeah, pray for
God. If he survives, pray that he'll remain faithful to you.
Yep. And so that's what we're here with. And so what happens to babies, right? I mean, what happens to babies? Babies are safe. You know, the Bible uses, I wrote these verses down.
When the unscripted podcast becomes scripted.
Acts 7 and verse 60. I just wrote them so I could read them real quick. Peter's preaching. Stephen's preaching in Acts 7. They take him outside the city to stone him. Verse 60. When he had said this, when he says, Lord, forgive them, they don't know, lay not this sin to their charge. When he said this, he fell asleep. Key in on this same word. Acts 13, when they're talking about David, he fell asleep, was buried with his fathers. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 6, Paul said, many over the 500 brethren seen Jesus alive, but some have fallen asleep. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 18, then those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished, if their faith is vain and Christ is not risen. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 13, concerning those who have fallen asleep, he wanted them to know what's happened to those that have passed. Verse 15, the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. So all these verses here that go into this, it paints this picture that we really just go on to our rest. We're really just going to rest until the Lord brings us back to all of us one day. And because the big thing is not that we're going to die, because we're all going to do that. You know, Solomon said it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of fasting in Ecclesiastes, feasting, because in the party, when we go to a party, we don't think about our immortality. We think about the fun. But at a funeral, we know that it's the great unifier. And we had a funeral for somebody recently here, and my boy said, that guy don't look like he did alive. I said, because it's not him. And that's why I don't want a funeral for that very reason. So the Lord wants us to be like David in this sense, like Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27. It's appointed unto man once to die. After this, the judgment. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, that we'll all stand before the judgment seat of Christ to give account for the things done in the flesh, whether they be good or whether they be evil. So the blessing is that the Lord, for the baby, is the what? They can stand redeemed, period. They're redeemed. And heaven will be full of people that never got a chance to obey the gospel. So for us, when the baby dies, we've got to hold fast, because he's just going to sleep, and you're going to join him one day. And try to have that mentality that David had, that he can't come to me, but I can go to him, because there's certainly going to be a day where we will face the Lord in judgment. And you will not get to say, Lord, because my baby died, I gave up on you. That won't be an excuse. Because if it was, it'd be good enough for Mary. My son died unjustly. That don't work. It's because the Lord wants you to be faithful. And there's a lot of tragedy that happens in our lives, and it's horrible. And none of us want to face it. None of us want to face tragedy, but it's a reality. And so the what is this: what you should do with your life with regards to it.
Yeah, there's a couple verses that I want to remind people of. You know, one is Jesus reminds us that Satan is the father of lies. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he has nothing to do with the truth. And so he's going to put many things in your mind. Well, one thing that people put in mind is they say, God took my child from me.
Yeah.
Now, I want to look at two verses. One was directly from Jesus, and then another one is from the book of Hebrews. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 2. And there's something in here that remember that Jesus 2:9, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. And so,
read verse 10.
For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. And so he brings us to suffering, brings us through suffering, and he takes death by the grace of God.
He doesn't cause the suffering.
No.
You understand? He brings us through it.
He brings us through it. And then verse 14, here's part of this. Remember that Satan is in charge of death. Satan is responsible for so much. Verse 14, inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he, Jesus himself, likewise share in the same, that through death he might destroy him, Satan, who had the power of death. That is the devil. So Satan has the power of death.
Yeah. And that's why Paul uses this perfect picture in 1 Corinthians 15 of the resurrection. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory?
Yeah.
You know, Jesus is the champion of that. And so you look at this, and like James 1 in verse 14, 17, every good and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. So you think about this in context right here. All these things are talking about the negative, right? The challenges that we're going to have in life. If James 1 and verse 17 says, every good and perfect thing comes from God, then I do this thing sometimes like we've talked about before. If this is true, then the opposite is true. So if all the good is from God, then all the bad is from where? Satan. So you can never blame God for what's happened. You can only blame Satan for what's happened. He's the reason that babies die. He's the reason that we live in a fallen world. Now, I understand every single person, Romans 5 tells us that every single person's got skin in the game because they sinned. It's not because Adam passed it down throughout the generations. But ultimately, this idea, and you touched on it, like look at what Jesus, are you going to read some more there in Hebrews?
No.
In Jesus, in John chapter 8 and verse 44, he says, that's what he's talking about. Listen to what he says. You are of your father, the devil. You know, they're the ones that these Pharisees are saying that Jesus is this evil person. You know that they are, and Jesus saying you're not of Abraham. You know, they try to make this case. I'm of Abraham's seed. He's like, no, you're not. If you were of Abraham's seed, you would do the things that Abraham did. And he said, you are of your father, the devil. Verse 44, you are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning. So who commits murder? Who kills babies? The devil. And does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources. Just think about the word that Jesus is using there. A resource is something that you use to make a object, to produce something. Jesus says Satan is his own resource. He is the originator of all things wrong. He's showing that all things bad, then, he's the resource of it. So if anything bad happens, it comes from the resource. A sickness has to start with a resource. A car accident starts with a resource. The resource, Jesus said, the caboose is the devil. Mm-hmm. He's the originator of it all. He speaks from his own resource, for he's a liar and the father of it.
Yeah, there's a unique thing in Luke 13. Jesus gives us some insight when he was talking. You have this woman in Luke 13 who has this infirmity for 18 years. In Luke 13:11, and behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years and was bent over and could in no way raise herself up. She couldn't straighten up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. And he laid hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. Well, then the ruler of the synagogue, they start, saying all this negative stuff or whatever, hubbubbing with him.
Hee-hawing.
Yeah, going, hey, there's 6 days that you should work. You shouldn't be doing anything on the Sabbath. So, but verse 16, Jesus says, So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound. Think of it, for 18 years, be loose from this bond on the Sabbath. And so Satan is the one who bound this woman, who caused this infirmity in her life. So remember that the wages of sin is death, and Satan, he has power over death. Satan is a ruler of darkness. And so this life, in fact, Jesus told him that he is the ruler of this world. But Jesus says, be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. And we look so much at right now and not thinking with the end in mind. And that's where Satan wants us to be, is thinking right here and right now and what I have lost, and not about what the child has gained, not about what heaven has gained. And so we by nature are selfish, and we are. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who loves our children more than we love our children. And
maybe Mimi and Poppy.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Grandparents would. And so if Satan goes, all right. Now, so Satan wants to do this to everybody. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy, but he also is the great deceiver. And so he understands, like, I can tactfully and tactically do this. And if I can take one away, well, and then I can cause the rest of them not to make it. God gives us free will, but he also, if God was not in some way hindering Satan on some levels,
just be glad he's got him by the chain.
He's bound. And so he tells us, you resist the devil, he'll flee from you. That's your own free will, but we have to be the ones who resist. I gave this thing for the way out for people with pornography. I said, hey, if you want help, it's here. I had one person come to me and said, hey, I want to hit you up on that this week. Absolutely. But you have to be the one seeking it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm probably going to follow up with them, but I'm giving them a day or two to see if they really want to follow up. And because the ball's in their court, you have your own free will. Well, as you reflect on this, like God, he does put some boundaries on Satan. Mm-hmm. But remember that it's not God who took away your child. It's Satan, and it's our sinful nature that takes it all away. And so I'm just as responsible for death and for things. Now we understand Ezekiel tells us Ezekiel 18, the soul who sins shall die. The son doesn't bear the guilt of the father doesn't bear the guilt of the son. But it's sin in general. But
so we hope that the why we answered last week, and we hope the what we answer this week. And it's not about, if you thought the what was going to be about what happens afterwards, you were thinking about maybe the moment after they breathe their last breath. But we need to think about the what, because the what for them is secure. The what for us is not.
Yeah.
The what for us is when we take our last breath. Your faith should remain one more breath than you should.
And I want to touch on that. Will you touch on Romans 15:4 for a minute?
Romans 15:4 says, "For whatever things are written before time." You may read it or just quote it. Romans 15:4 says, "For whatever things are written before time were written for our learning, that we, through patience and the comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope." I mean, Galatians 3 and verse 26, it kind of echoes the same. 24 echoes the same thing. Therefore, the law, there are things written before time, was our tutor to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. They're saying the same thing. Whatever things written before time were written for our learning, that we, through patience and the comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. The law was a tutor. Literally, the word there means the guy ringing the bell at a schoolyard. You remember they used to have the school bell, like a little house on the prairie, they ring the bell and everybody comes. Really, that's the picture that is painting there. It's the guy, the law was ringing the bell. Get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. The Romans 15 paints the picture. It was preparing us so that we could grow up and become the mature people that Christ wanted us to be.
And the big thing that we need, that people need, is hope. And as people need hope today, like we think, we think about regular hope or what hope that the world offers. There's no hope that the world offers. The world's going to offer you a false hope.
Love not the world nor the things therein, and this world is passing away.
And so the world wants to tell you about this false hope, or maybe you have this hope to where, well, I hope that the red light's going to turn green because I'm running late, or I just hope that this situation just handles itself. Yeah,
I hope I don't get a ticket. Well, he's literally writing it.
Yeah, right. Well, I hope that my garden will grow, but you don't go out there and plant any seeds. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not just going to have anything things happen. Well, God, He gives us this. Then you have you have expectant hope, which is not true biblical hope. And we've talked about this on the podcast, but just a little recap that. Expecting hope is I'm expecting to walk my daughter down the aisle one day. That might not happen.
Right, and that's not biblical hope.
That's not biblical hope.
But that's a reasonable expectation.
It's expecting hope. And I'm expecting to walk her down the aisle. I'm expecting to see my kids graduate. Carson, I'm expecting that he right now is trying to get his learner's permit. I'm expecting that he's going to be fine. You talked to me earlier today about your kid getting in the car with another kid to go pick up a third kid to meet you somewhere. You were expecting them to all make it there. It may not always happen.
Right.
And so I just pray that God that I will lean on and hold to true biblical hope, which is certain hope. Mm-hmm. And God says this in Hebrews 6. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul is both sure and steadfast, and enters behind the presence of the veil, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, and it's forever. And so this hope that we have as an anchor, it's sure and steadfast, it's not going away, and it enters the presence of the veil in heaven. And he says that by two immutable things, two things that are guaranteed, God confirmed these things with an oath. It's impossible, one, for God to lie, and the second thing is that he gave us an oath. And so God shows more abundantly to us as heirs of promise that we have certain hope that we have in heaven. So the what for you today may be moving forward, and you saying, well, what do I do now? Be like David and say, the child can't come to me, I'm going to go to him. I'm going to do everything that I can to go to him. But take as many people with you. When in John 9, did this man who sinned, this man or his mother and father? Neither of them, but that the works of God. This guy, he'd been, how long had this guy been blind?
His whole life.
His whole life.
Yeah, he was probably born without an optic nerve. The man born blind.
He was older than Jesus. He had been, and you think about the guy who laid paralyzed at the temple when
38 years. What it was?
That was the guy at the Pool of Siloam, the guy at the temple there.
In Acts 3.
In Acts 3 and 4, this guy, when he had been there, he says 40 years. This man was over 40 years old on whom the miracle of healing had been performed. So Satan had this guy bound for longer than what Jesus had been on the earth. And you think, well, why didn't Jesus heal this guy? Why didn't Jesus go and heal this dude during his ministry? Well, it's so that later the works of God could be glorified through Peter and John, so that the message about Jesus could be preached. And so we have to realize, losing a child is the worst thing that I don't know what could be worse. And I guess losing 2 children. And I can't think of something, but I can't think of something better for the people who are true Christians who've gone through it, to minister to those others who've had any kind of loss, and to point them to true biblical hope. So what's the what for you now? That the works of God may be glorified through your situation. And God took something that was meant for evil that Satan wanted to do, and that was that old rugged cross. And man, look at what God did with it. And God can do the same thing through you. So what's the what for you? We hope that it's true biblical hope, and that you'll seek the Lord, and you'll gain comfort from the Scriptures.